Well, I'm so excited to have with us on the show today the CEO of Goya Foods, Bob Unanue. Thank you so much for being with us today. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Virginia, and you did a great job with my last name. The first name Bob is easy, but the second one is a little bit tougher.
Well, it's a great name, and it was one that you were introduced at the White House by former President Donald Trump, then President Donald Trump, back in 2020. And you gave some comments. It was the middle of COVID. There was so much happening. And, businesses, many businesses were really struggling. And there was also a need for businesses to really step up at that time. And you gave some very positive remarks about Trump at the White House. And you said that the nation was really blessed to have Trump as a president. For those comments, you received quite a lot of backlash. The far left tried to cancel you, including Alexandria Ocasio Cortez. But I'm curious to know, since then, it's been a few years since that situation happened at the White House and the left tried to cancel you. How's business been?
Business has been great. I was there to offer food to a country that didn't have food because people were, getting in their bunkers, very afraid. In the Bible, it says 365 times, be not afraid. We were in the middle of COVID. The government had said, we're an essential business. So we're in the food business. But work is essential. You need a reason to get up every day: God, family, work. And so we were working. We went to our employees and said, hey, this is going to be a tough road, but what do you think? And they said, well, we can't do it. If we don't do it, no one else will. So we said, presente. It said, we're here. Uh, how many restaurants and other businesses were closed? And unfortunately, it was an attack at the end of the day, not only in the United States, but around the world, on the working class. And if we didn't have those essential businesses running, farming, distribution, food manufacturing, we'd all be it'd be a different world. And a lot of people that don't need to work physically, work virtually, they were able to uh, survive. And I have six children. One of them was very sick here in Texas,
Mm.
and a doctor that another son had uh, came with the advice to his brother, my other son, uh, tell him to get up and walk because this was the lay down and die disease, the COVID. And if you weren't moving, you were dying. Um, but anyway, so at that time, I wanted to reach out to the White House to say, because I felt that our president and our country needed to get closer to the Latino Hispanic community. The United States is the second largest Hispanic community in the world after Mexico. We will be the biggest group by 2050 or much sooner. And so, and there's so many things that go along with it. But the Hispanic community, the Black community, uh, a lot of these minorities are the backbone of this country, and work is so important. God, family, work, and so uh, this attack kind of killed our spirit and our reason to get up every day. So I wanted to offer to the country and to the chief executive, Donald Trump, at the time. And I had been with the Obamas before in their Let's Move and My Plate initiatives, healthy eating. But we wanted to get close to Donald Trump. At the same time, they offered me a position as a commissioner to be on the White House Commission for Hispanic Prosperity. And I said, well, that's a good idea also. So on July 9th, and before that, I got COVID. There wasn't vaccines at the time, and I've never taken any since because I got God's vaccine. And my friend Dr. Carson says you have the the God's vaccine, the T cell memory, And it was interesting though. I traveled quite a bit because we have facilities in Europe. Traveled quite a bit during that time period, and you had to take PCR tests and things
Hmm.
like that. But this one doctor who was able to get me a quick test, and I'd always go there, or this one clinic, They said, hold for the doctor. And it says, I want to save your life. So, wow. All of a sudden, everybody's interested in my health. I said, well, I've had the vaccine. I've had COVID. I haven't had the vaccine. Oh, that only lasts a couple months. I said, I know people who've gotten sick or died over it. He goes, oh, I can tell you're the victim of misinformation. But basically, they were the victim of greed because you got money for a COVID diagnosis on a death. You got money for a jab instead of a test. And, you know, what runs the world today is money and power, money and control. The genie in Aladdin says to Aladdin, never drink from the cup of money or power. You'll never be satisfied. And you've seen that the industries that have prospered, the only industries that have really prospered under this Harris administration is drugs and trafficking. 75% of people trafficked are women, 25% are children. The Latino community is one of the biggest victims of this. And this is just, it's horrific what's happening. This year now, the Inspector General of HHS, Health and Human Services, has found 325,000 children missing. Basically, they're sold. They're sold into slavery, into sex, into all that. But I'm getting off the topic. But at the time when in the middle of COVID, on July 9th, 2020, we were summoned to the White House to do this commission, and at the same time, they offered me to speak. And I also decided, hey, let me offer a couple £1 million of food to the country. It turned out to be 5 million pounds, and not only in this country, but in Venezuela and other places around the world where the same issues were happening. So I get there, and it's amazing, in the room with the president and the cabinet and all these people and the media. And as I'm speaking in the Rose Garden, the Holy Spirit put this word blessed on my lips. And I said, we're blessed to have a president like President Trump, who's a builder, love and build versus hate and destroy. And it's as if I had uh, yelled fire in the theater. And it didn't happen all at once. There was no bolt of lightning or anything like that. But the next day, all of a sudden, I found myself in the middle of a controversy because I used the word blessed.
Mm-hmm.
How could I use a word blessed with a person that people either hated or loved? But the hate came out, the evil came out, and this cultural war, cancel culture. Uh, they called for a boycott of our
Yeah.
company.
Company.
Uh, Fortunately, because I really had done nothing wrong, and they called for my apologies, and I said, hell no, I'm not going to apologize. And you apologize, and then you get fired anyway. So I stuck to my guns, and it's the Holy Spirit that represents courage, and that sent us on a road that is quite an interesting story, which I outline in my book.
Yeah.
Bless Donald Trump and the spiritual war.
So was that situation at the White House what inspired this new book, Bless Donald J. Trump and the Spiritual War? Was that the beginning of this idea of, hey, I want to write a book about where we are at this moment in history?
Well, I was really nobody. I didn't have a platform. I'm CEO of a company, but all of a sudden, I was placed, I believe, by the Holy Spirit in the middle of this controversy to say, hey, we need to follow two paths: either love, build, create, or hate, destroy, divide. And so, 4 years later, today, I'm talking to you. I'm talking to Maria Bartiromo. I'm talking to a lot of people in the media, Huckabee, Tucker Carlson, many people. And for several weeks after the White House event, I was on uh, all the media were talking about this, CNN and all those other people, but I wouldn't do interviews with them, only with friendly fire, uh, because you're being those are the people who are attacking you.
Mhm.
And AOC called for a boycott. We did so well. Uh, this one gentleman working with Eric Bolling, did uh, GoFundMe, raised over $300,000, did a video and went out and bought our product. So this boycott turned into a boycott.
Hmm.
And I think that was the Holy Spirit uh, uh, protecting company and protecting me and Donald Trump. And I think at that moment, and it's some amazing things that have happened with rosaries, with people with predictions. But I think God put his hand on Donald J. Trump and said, he's going to lead this country, help lead this country closer to God, to the point where, fast forward to June 11th or was it, no, July 13th.
Hmm.
And at 6:11, which is Ephesians, put on the armor of God. Saint Paul to the Ephesians, put on the armor of God, where Donald J. Trump turned his head at the exact moment that he was shot at,
Mm-hmm.
and when the bullets went parallel to his head instead of perpendicular, and we have him still with us. So I think the hand of God, the Holy Spirit, is protecting this man because we are moving away from God. This is a spiritual war that was started on I believe on that July 9th, where the Holy Spirit says we're blessed, and let's give you this platform, and let's ignite the cancel culture. Let's ignite. And you look at the hatred that's happening today against the Jewish community, against, we're not called to hate. We're called to love God and our neighbors as ourselves. Through being involved in the movie um, Sound of Freedom with Jim Caviezel and Eduardo Verástegui and other people talking about child trafficking, I think was ignited. This also brought attention to the plight of child trafficking, human trafficking. And so I developed Goya Cares, which has to do with the trafficking, but at the same time, it has to do with mental health of the children. Tim Ballard, who's played by Jim Caviezel, goes into the jungles of Colombia to rescue children, which he did and still does. But imagine the children today. Where the children today and youth are not feeling valued. They wake up every day. They say, "Hey, look, you don't have to go to school for 2 years." In some places, the school unions kept the teachers away from schools and the kids out of the schoolroom and the classroom. And the mental health, the suicides has just exploded. And I think that children, youth today don't feel value. We get value from God as children of God. We don't get value from a letter, from a flag. I mean, they have map flags now. Minor attracted people, even pedophiles have their flag. But we have to realize that our value comes from God, and then and to love, and realizing that we love ourselves, and then if we love ourselves, we can love our neighbor as ourselves. And instead, we're finding ourselves in this spiritual war with this hatred and division instead of love and creating.
Yeah.
And that's what my book goes into. And it's a, it's a long, it's a little bit of a story there, but it's about the spiritual war and how the Holy Spirit has intervened. And I think we're in an existential election
It's a
with
critical time.
Donald Trump.
And I think so many people are recognizing that as we look at some of those issues that you've just mentioned that Americans are thinking about that are really on the forefront. Bob, I am curious to ask you, there was some recent polling done just ahead of the election and looking specifically at the Hispanic population and where they stand. And there was some recent polling reported that said that among the Hispanic vote that Trump is behind Harris just by about 10 points. And I think a lot of folks would think that would actually usually be a larger margin. But do you think that's a pretty accurate representation that in some of those swing states, there's maybe only a 10-point difference between Trump and Harris?
No, actually, I've been, after my thing at the White House, I was contacted by Ben Carson of his American Cornerstone Institute, who's now the face chairman for the campaign. AFPI, which is Brooke Rollins and Linda McMahon, who's on the transition team. Uh, and they approached me to reach out to the Hispanic community. And so if you go back a couple elections, the Hispanic community was 20 some percent, conservative. Uh, it's The last one was in the 30s, and this now we're mid 40s and someplace 50%. So I think the conditions that have been created during this administration, the Harris administration, of inflation, declaring war on fossil fuels from the very beginning, which created then the Green New Deal, which is very expensive and not realistic, our weakness around the world, which the war in Ukraine and between Russia and Ukraine, they have 50% of the world's fertilizer, 30% of the world's wheat, 20% of the world's corn, caused tremendous uh, inflation. Plus, I've worked all my life. I've worked almost 50 years. The average Social Security check is $1,200, but you have illegals coming into this country, and some criminals who want to do us harm. They're handed $3,800, $4,000 a month, uh, and they haven't worked a day in their lives here,
Mm.
and it's so that costs money too.
Yeah,
And
I am curious to get your thoughts on the border issue. Is that an issue that you think will cost Trump in being so clear on the border? Will that cost Trump with Hispanic voters?
no, because Hispanic voters who in this country have waited online sometimes many years. They're
Mm.
not for people just coming over the border. And by the way, Donald Trump, and I was listening to him the other day, is saying he's going to deport the criminal. There's several steps in this. You have the dreamers who've been there for many years, and so it's a complicated issue over the years. But what's happened over the last 3.5 years, 4 years, is an influx from 180 countries, from China, from Iran, from Venezuela. I have a daughter-in-law from Venezuela. The Tren de Aragua, which is overtaking apartment buildings in Aurora, Colorado, in New York City. They're brutal groups who Maduro has exported out of Colombia, out of Venezuela, and sent to our country. And we're turning on, it's safe. He's advertising in Venezuela, it's safe because all the Tren de Aragua has left, and all the, as Cuba did in 1980. And MS-13, I was recently with President Bukele in El Salvador. They've arrested 15,000 MS-13, but many of the MS-13 are in this country. If you have people, we're a country of immigrants. So you have immigrants that come into this country that want, as my grandfather came and started Goya Foods in 1904, went to Puerto Rico, and like John F. Kennedy said, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. That you come here to participate, to make this country great and prosperous. And so, but we're opening the doors to people who want to come in here and destroy us, and that can't be. We wouldn't let them into our homes. We can't let them into our country and put ourselves at risk, and lose this country because we're so the Hispanic, for several reasons. One, inflation has the biggest effect on minority groups, Black, Hispanic, etc. And they're a lot of the working class, the grunt work, if you will. And so they're feeling the punch, the crunch of having to work two jobs, etc. The other thing is the Latino Hispanic is the biggest victim of trafficking and
Mm.
abuse. So they're being exploited and abused. So and they're driving us into poverty, and poverty is slavery. Dr. Ben Carson said there's more slaves in the world today than in the history of the world, and there's a few people that want the money, the greed and control, that want to keep us in submission, in exploitation, in abuse. And it's time that the hardworking people of this country, reject a party that is bent on exploitation.
Mm.
Of course, you have the big cities in every state almost, here in Texas, Houston, Dallas, St. Austin, San Antonio, that are with all the handouts. We're saying there's no reason to get up in the morning, but we need to have a purpose. But if we educate ourselves, see, in communist countries, it doesn't matter what education you have because everyone's paid the same supposedly.
Mm.
So there's no incentive to excel. So if why educate yourselves if we can just sit back and the government's going to take care of us? But
Mhm.
if it's not the government taking care of us, it's them buying our souls and our hearts and saying, "We control you. Don't worry about you know eh, getting producing the best out of the gifts that God has given you."
Yeah, well, and you offer so much insight, and really, I know you're diving into your story as well in your book. Encourage all of our listeners. It's out September 24th. Blessed Donald J. Trump and the Spiritual War. Again, you can get that book out officially on September 24th. You can pre-order a copy. Bob Unanue, the CEO of Goya Foods. Bob, thank you for your time today. Really appreciate you joining the show.
Thank you, Virginia. God bless you. Thank you so much.